Chapter 33. How a dreadful crime plunges Paris into a state of terror. The city was asleep. Their footsteps rang loudly on the deserted pavement. Having reached the corner of the Rue Dutrier, halfway up Montmartre, the little company halted before the dwelling of the beautiful angel. Arcade was talking about the thrones and dominations with Zita, who, her finger on the bell, could not make up her mind to ring. Prince Istar was tracing the mechanism of a new sort of bomb on the pavement with the end of his stick, and bellowed so loudly that he woke the sleeping citizens and stirred into activity the amoratory passions of the neighboring Pasifas. Théophile was singing the barcarolle from the second act of Aline, Queen of Golconda, at the top of his voice. Maurice, his arm in a sling, was fencing left-handed with the Japanese, striking sparks from the pavement and crying, "A hit, in a piercing voice. Meanwhile, Inspector Groll, at the corner of the next street, was dreaming. He had the bearing of a Roman legionary, and displayed all the characteristics of that proudly servile race, who, ever since men first took to building cities, have been the mainstay of empires and the support of ruling houses. Inspector Groll was very strong, but very tired. He suffered from an arduous profession and from lack of food. He was a man devoted to duty, but still a man, and he was unable to resist the wiles, the charms, and the blandishments of the joyous ladies whom he met in swarms, in the shadows, along the empty streets, and round about pieces of waste ground. He loved them. He loved like a soldier under arms. It tired him, but courage conquered fatigue. Though he had not yet reached the middle of life's way, he longed for the sweet repose and beautiful country pursuits. At the corner of the Rue Muller, on this light, mild night, he stood lost in thought. He was dreaming of the house where he was born, of the little olive wood, of his father's bit of ground, of his old mother, bent with long and heavy labor, whom he would never see again. Roused from his reverie by the nocturnal tumult, Inspector Groll turned the corner of the street and looked rather unfavorably at the band of loiterers, were in his social instinct suspected enemies of law and order. He was patient and resolute. After a lengthy silence, he said, with awe-inspiring calm, "Move on there." But Maurice and the Japanese angel were fencing and heard nothing. The musician heard nothing but his own melodies. Prince Istar was absorbed in the explanation of explosive formulae. Zita was discussing with Arcade the greatest enterprise that had ever been conceived since the solar system was issued from its original nebula, and thus they all remained unconscious of their surroundings. "Move on, I tell you," repeated Inspector Groll. This time the angels heard a solemn word of warning, but either through indifference or contempt, they neglected to obey, and continued their talk, their songs, and their cries. "So, you want to be taken up, do you?" shouted Inspector Groll, clapping his great hand on Prince Istar's shoulder. The Carib was indignant at this vile contact, and with one blow from his formidable fist, sent the inspector flying into the gutter. But Constable Fasandet was already running to his comrade's aid, and they both fell upon the prince, whom they belabored with mechanic fury, and whom, notwithstanding his strength and weight, they would, perchance, have dragged, all bleeding, to the police station, had not the Japanese angel overset them, one after the other without effort, and reduced them to writhing and shrieking in the mud. For Maurice, Arcade, and Zita had time to intervene. As to the angelic musician, he stood apart, trembling, and invoked the heavens. At this moment, 2 bakers, who were kneading their dough in a neighboring cellar, ran out at the noise in their white aprons, stripped to the waist. With an instinctive feeling for social solidarity, they took the side of the downfallen police. Théophile, convinced, conceived just a fear at the sight of them, and fled away. They caught him and were about to hand him over to the guardians of the peace, when Arcade and Zita tore him from their limbs. The fight continued, unequal and terrible, between the 2 angels and the 2 bakers, like an athlete of Lysippus in strength and beauty. Arcade smothered his heavy adversary in his arms. The beautiful archangel drove her dagger into the baker, who had attacked her. A dark stream of blood flowed down over his hairy chest, and the 2 white-capped supporters of the law sank to the ground. Constable Fessendant had fainted face downward in the gutter, but Inspector Groll, who had got up, blew a blast on his whistle loud enough to be heard at the neighboring police station, and sprang upon young Maurice, who, having but one arm with which to defend himself, fired his revolver with his left hand at the inspector, who put his hand to his heart, staggered, and dropped down. He gave a long sigh, and the shadows of eternity darkened his eyes. Meanwhile, windows opened one by one, and heads looked out on the street. A sound of heavy steps approached. 2 policemen on bicycles debouched upon the street. Thereupon Prince Istar flung a bomb which shook the ground, put out the gas, shattered some of the houses, and enveloped the flight of young Maurice and the angels in a dense smoke. Arcade and Maurice came to the conclusion that the safest thing to do after this adventure was to return to the little flat in the Rue de Rome. They would certainly not be sought for immediately, and probably not at all, the bomb thrown by the Carib having fortunately wiped out all witnesses of the affair. They fell asleep towards dawn, and they had not yet awoke at 10 o'clock in the morning, when the concierge brought them their tea. While eating his toast and butter and slice of ham, young d'Esperville remarked to the angel, "I used to think that a murder was something very extraordinary, while I was mistaken. It is the simplest and most natural action in the world, and of the most ancient tradition," replied the angel. "For long centuries it was both usual and necessary for a man to kill and to spoil his fellows. It still is recommended in warfare. It is also honorable to attempt human life in certain definite circumstances, and people approved when you wanted to assassinate me, Maurice, because it appeared to you that I had been intimate with your mistress. But killing a police inspector is not the action of a man of fashion." "Be silent," exclaimed Maurice. "Be silent, scoundrel. I killed the poor inspector instinctively, not knowing what I was doing. I am grieved to my heart about it, but it is not I, it is you who are the guilty one, you who are the murderer. It was you who lured me along this path of revolt and violence, which leads to the pit. You have been my undoing. You have sacrificed my peace of mind, my happiness, to your pride and your wickedness, and all in vain, for I warn you, Arcade, you will not succeed in what you are undertaking." The concierge brought in the newspapers. On seeing them, Maurice grew pale. They announced the outrage in the Rue de Rome in huge headlines. An inspector killed, 2 cyclists, policemen, and 2 bakers seriously wounded, 3 houses blown up, numerous victims. Maurice let the paper drop and said in a weak and plaintive voice, "Arcade, why did ye not slay me in the little garden at Versailles, amid the roses, to the song of the blackbirds?" Meanwhile, terror reigned in Paris, in the public squares and in the crowded streets. Housewives, string bag in hand, grew pale as they listened to the story of the crime, and consigned the perpetrators to the most dreadful punishment. Shopkeepers, standing at the doors of their shops, put it all down to the anarchist, syndicalist, socialist, and radicals, and demanded that special measures should be taken against them. The more thoughtful people recognized the handiwork of the Jew and the German and demanded the expulsion of all aliens. Many vaunted the ways of America and advocated lynching. In addition to the printed news, sinister rumors became current. Explosions had been heard at various places. Everywhere bombs had been discovered. Everywhere individuals taken for malefactors had been struck down by the popular arm and given up to justice, torn to ribbons. On the Place de la République, a drunkard who was crying, "Down with the police," was torn to pieces by the crowd. The president of the council and minister of justice held long conferences with the prefect of police, and they agreed to take immediate action in order to allay the excitement of the Parisians. They arrested 5 or 6 hooligans out of the 30,000 which the capital contains. The chief of the Russian police, believing he recognized in this attack the methods of the nihilists, demanded, on behalf of his government, that a dozen refugees should be given up. The demand was immediately granted. Proceedings were also taken for certain individuals to be extradited to ensure the safety of the King of Spain. On learning of these energetic measures, Paris breathed once more, and the evening papers congratulated the government. There was excellent news of the wounded. They were out of danger and identified as their assailants, all who were brought before them. True, Inspector Groll was dead, but 2 sisters of mercy kept vigil at his side, and the president of the council came and laid the cross of honor on the breast of this victim of duty. At night there were panics. In the Avenue de la Revolt, the police, noticing a traveling acrobat's caravan on a piece of waste ground, took it for the retreat of a band of robbers. They whistled for help, and when they were a goodly number, attacked the caravan. Some worthy citizens joined them. 15,000 revolver shots were fired. The caravan was blown up with dynamite, and among the debris, they found the corpse of a monkey. And, well, that's where the problem with unspecified approaches of so-called justice fail, right? Like we've seen with the Mark Twain, or Samuel Clemens, he's called. And, well, I mean, Samuel Clemens is his non-writer name. And he didn't like, that there were lynchings. It's like, because sometimes it seemed like way too much of the time they ended up getting the wrong person. And, when the police are involved, that happens too. And the answer is not down with the police, and it's not pro-police either.